We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Oil and gas prices are on the rise. Is it due to the war in Ukraine, or is something else afoot? Well, to help us figure out the precise dynamics of that, we're joined by Liberty Nation's economics correspondent and author, Mr. Andrew Moran. Welcome back to the show, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me, Andrew, what's happening with oil and energy?
Well, if you have several hours, I can go to every single nook and cranny of what's going on. But
Give me the three-word answer.
I think at the time of this recording, the biggest story occurred in the Middle East when the OPEC and its allies, OPEC Plus, announced that they were sustaining their production output level. So that's about 400,000 barrels per day extra, as opposed to just ramping up and taking advantage of this huge prices and providing some relief to the markets. That's one story. Another story is in coal. That whole SWIFT ban is preventing Russia from exporting more coal to China. So that's going to be huge for coal markets. You saw prices spiked double in a couple of trading sessions. That's remarkable.
Sorry to interrupt,
Chevron,
Andrew. I have
yes.
a quick question on that. So now that SWIFT, which is basically an electronic funds transfer system, right?
Yes.
Now that that's down, is there another way in which China can continue to pay for, I believe it's 15% of their stocks that are coming in from Russia, Ukraine? Is there another way for them to pay for that?
Yeah, so this happened. Actually, it's funny you mention because I was writing about this last night. And a couple of years ago, when China started flirting with the digital yuan, they developed their own SWIFT alternative called SIPS. Now, SIPS is part of their broader, from my point of view, the broader de-dollarization efforts to avoid, relying on the U.S. dollar and skirting sanctions and skirting Western restrictions. It's quite big compared to the Russian alternative too, because Russia also has its own SWIFT alternative. It has dozens of Russian banks, dozens of regional financial institutions and businesses organizations. So yes, it can avoid SWIFT by relying on SIPS to trade with Russia.
And are they doing that as far as we know?
I haven't seen any data on that suggest that they are, but more likely, if there's more pressure being applied to Russia and, the SWIFT is really impacting Moscow, then of course, Jamie Dimon, he's the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, is the largest bank in the world. And he was talking about how SWIFT is a relic of a bygone era. It doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't have as much pain as it would have, let's say, 20 years ago, because it was made in 1973. It predates even the fax machine. He made a funny quip. He's saying, you can just avoid SWIFT by sending an email to whatever party with financial instructions. And that's the best way to avoid utilizing SWIFT.
All right. So speaking of the oil situation, now President Biden, he announced during his State of the Union speech that the world at large was releasing 60 million barrels of oil, and that 30 million barrels would be coming from the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Now, am I right in thinking that this is, let's call it a drop of oil in a muddy ocean?
Yeah, absolutely. He did this in November, late last year at least, and he released 50 million barrels, 15 of which were already established upon before that announcement. And it did nothing to curb oil prices at all. I think it lowered gasoline prices by a couple of pennies, and the administration was celebrating so much. So this 30 million barrels is nothing. The U.S. consumes at least 17 million barrels a day. So that's good enough for at most 3 days worth of energy to keep the lights on in the United States. So it does absolutely nothing. You saw the markets. When that announcement was made, the market just kept skyrocketing. It kept increasing because traders know that this 60 million of global releasing of strategic reserves is nothing. You're right. It's a drop in the bucket. It's not going to do anything at all to lower energy prices. Your best thing to do, if he wanted to be serious about that whole reserves, he could have said, you know what, we're going to release 30 million barrels into the markets and we're going to raise output dramatically. But of course, that's not going to happen with this administration.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, that there are a number of options that Joe Biden could do to ease energy pain on American consumers. I mean, first of all, he could reinstate the lease for the pipelines. He could ask areas to ramp up production in-house in the United States. In fact, I think probably the best way to term this would be put it back to Trump era regulations and output.
Yeah, you're right. Before COVID, the U.S., the peak was 13.1 million barrels a day. Today, the U.S. is producing around 11.4 million barrels per day. Just this morning, the Chevron CEO, he came out and he said, you know what, we're willing to increase output, but the administration has not reached out to us. The White House has not talked to any of the major energy leaders to talk about, increasing production, because their main concern, as I've pointed out multiple times on this radio show, is that a lot of these energy companies, they're terrified of the regulatory uncertainty that stemmed from Biden's green agenda. You saw just last week they announced that they were suspending permits for drilling on federal lands. These are just the myriad of issues that prevent oil and gas companies from producing more and helping lower these. I think the price I saw was at $112 a barrel for the WTI contract, which is astounding.
It reminds me of that old gag. What did socialists use before candles? Electricity. So let's carry on with President Biden for a moment. He seems to be saying that the war in Ukraine, it's making things tough on Americans, and that he has plans to ease this burden. For example, the 30 million barrels of oil. But it seems to me that all the war has actually done is exacerbate the existing conditions. What's your take on it?
Yeah, that's a perfect way to describe the situation. Russia, its main export is oil and gas. I mean, the world doesn't rely much, at least the United States doesn't rely much on anything else that Russia produces. The issue is that the situation in Ukraine and Russia is exacerbating prices. I mean, you look at wheat prices, for example, it experienced a limit up on the Chicago Board of Trade just on March 1st. It topped 1050 just this morning. So it's adding to inflationary pressures for a lot of the commodities that the United States consumes and produces. So wheat at 1050, soybeans at $16, oil's 112, natural gas is nearing $5. It's all going to add up and dramatically accelerate the monthly CPI reports. I mean, I can only imagine what the February and March inflation numbers are going to look like. It's absolutely terrifying, when you're a low and middle income consumer.
So how are Americans actually going to be impacted by this? Let's talk some precise figures if we can. How much are they likely to pay at the pump? How much increase are they likely to expect on their energy bills?
Yeah, well, I'll piggyback on what I was saying. We look at the American Automobile Association. The natural gas average is the last I checked was $3.65 per gallon. I mean, that's up from just $3.54 last time you and I spoke on this radio show. That's astounding. I mean, and it's going to keep going up. All the numbers I've seen from all the research notes and investment analysis is that oil is going to average around $110 in the first and second quarter. Some say it can go up to $125 if the situation Ukraine and Russia, continues to intensify. So that's one issue. Electricity, it's hard to gouge because the U.S. does have a lot of natural gas, but every time you look at the monthly CPI numbers, it always shows electricity prices and natural gas for homes is going up 4.4%. So people are going to pay dramatically more on their home costs. There was a great report came out from Capital Economics last week, I think it was, and they looked at the last 40 years of how energy prices impact your monthly inflation numbers. And it showed that for every time there's a $10 increase in the price of oil, it adds about 0.5% to the overall inflation numbers. So I think that's going to give you an expectation of what consumers can expect to pay, because oil impacts everything. No matter how much people talk about, transition to green energy, every single thing we consume is related to fossil fuels, whether it's mining lithium, you're using trucks that are powered with fossil fuels, whether it's buying, a shirt, you're going in a car to a shopping mall that probably, relies on natural gas for heating to buy this shirt. Everything is interconnected to fossil fuels. Having this idea that suddenly investing so much more in green energy right now is going to solve the problem is completely asinine. I mean, I don't know what Jen Psaki says. I know she's repeating whatever the administration tells her to say, but come on. I mean, that's not giving anyone any hope whatsoever. She was on ABC this week, and she said that any idea of raising output is a misdiagnosis to the problem. It's absolutely nonsense. And at the same time, she says renewables is the answer. It's not. Renewables is going to be good for 10 years from now. Right now, you want to stop the war, you want to ease price inflation, then you just ramp up production. It's simple as that. I'm just an economics writer for LibertyNation.com. I'm not part of a multi-billion-dollar energy company, and I didn't realize this.
Well, nobody ever said you had to be an expert to be elected. Andrew Moran, thank you ever so much.
Thank you for having me.
Judge Jackson Brown is on her way to the Supreme Court. What does her confirmation process look like? What's the timetable? And are there any bumps in the road? We'll be asking and answering these questions and many more right after this short break. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fighting for freedom.
Daily tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and
I
others.
can do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.